We're still in Chapter 4, Coordination and Subordination, but today's topic is working with compound sentences, especially all of your options for punctuating them. The relevant reading, pages 64 to 72. Our book goes through 5 ways to punctuate compound sentences. Were you familiar with all of them? Most people know the comma plus conjunction. And most people know about the semicolon. Did you know you could use a semicolon and a conjunction? You can use a semicolon and a conjunctive adverb or transitional phrase. You probably do this all the time, you just aren't aware of the terminology. Or you can actually use a colon. This is the great thing about rhetorical grammar. Our book subtitle is Grammatical Choices, Rhetorical Effects. So we're going to explore all of these different types of punctuation and the messages they might send to your audience. First, comma and conjunction. You use a coordinating conjunction, one of your fanboys' words, to join 2 complete sentences. If you look at the 3 examples that I've given here, doesn't each sentence have a slightly different meaning? Grammar is hard and tests are harder. And sort of gives balance to both parts, both complete sentences. Grammar is hard, but tests are harder. This puts more emphasis on the second part. And then we have the third. Grammar is hard, so tests are harder. We get a cause-effect relationship with the conjunction. Would this be a useful activity for you to do with your own writing or for you to lead students through? Have them try a combination of coordinating conjunctions, maybe have them try all 7 to see that some don't work to coordinate the complete sentences they're dealing with. A semicolon. On page 68, Cole and Gray advise us to think of a semicolon as a comma plus conjunction. It replaces a comma plus a fanboy's word. Grammar is hard, tests are harder. Students feel stressed, professor should assign less homework. Generally, teachers recommend that you use a semicolon when your 2 complete sentences are very closely related. Can you see, however, that in our second sentence there are a lot of choices we have besides a semicolon? Students feel stressed, so professor should assign less homework. Students feel stressed and professor should assign less homework. A semicolon plus conjunction. You still need 2 complete sentences. We're still talking about compound sentences. And this is especially useful when your second sentence already has its own comma, because this can emphasize the end of the sentence is its own sentence. Grammar is hard, semicolon, and tests are harder, especially in this class. The semicolon calls more attention to itself than the comma. We tend to pause a little more. What about a semicolon plus a conjunctive adverb? Page 65 has a detailed list, but here are some of the most popular. And probably as you look at these, you see that you are familiar with several of them as transition words, like also, then, furthermore, therefore. These choices alert our audience to the relationship between the 2 complete clauses in our compound sentence. Are they similar? Is it an also relationship? Or are they contrasting? Is it an instead relationship? Is it a cause-effect relationship? Therefore or thus? And here are some examples. Conjunctive adverbs are adverbs. And what is the one word that defines an adverb as distinct from the other form classes? Movability. Conjunctive adverbs are not conjunctions. They can move around. Look at the 3 different places that I have placed however in this compound sentence that has a semicolon and a conjunctive adverb. However, we still failed, we still, however, failed, or we still failed, however. Read them aloud to yourself. Where would you pause? Where would you put the emphasis? Your other option is a semicolon plus a transitional phrase instead of simply a single word. In addition to, of course, in contrast, as a result, the signals cause-effect. These are all choices that we make to help the reader make sense of our writing. Transitional prepositional phrases can move, just like conjunctive adverbs. Same sentence as before. We did poorly. In fact, we failed. We did poorly. We, in fact, failed. We did poorly. We failed, in fact. I read them all differently. Would you read them all differently? Which sentence do you think would be the most effective as you're breaking this news to your best friend? What if you were breaking this news to your parents or your academic advisor? Would you move around your prepositional phrase to emphasize or de-emphasize parts of this compound sentence? And finally, number 5, a colon. Our book authors recommend that when your second sentence is sort of a continuation or an example of whatever's in your first, you can use a colon. I learned a good lesson, colon. Grammar is hard. This really completes the idea from the first half of my sentence. And here's a little tip or trick. If you can mentally insert that is or in fact, you could use a colon. I learned a good lesson, that is, grammar is hard. A colon is much more direct. I learned a good lesson, namely that grammar is hard. It doesn't have the same rhythm. Why not just go for it? Comma splices in run-on sentences are frequently created when compound sentences aren't punctuated correctly. You can join two complete sentences. You can compound them with a comma and a conjunction. You can't just use a comma. This is a type of run-on called a comma splice, which teachers often note as CS. Students studied, they wanted to pass. So how can I correct this? Well, I can use any of the 5 punctuation methods for a compound sentence. I can add a conjunction. I can do a semicolon. I can do a semicolon and a conjunction. I can do a colon. A classic run-on sentence, also known as a fuse sentence, is where there is no punctuation between the 2 complete clauses that make up a compound sentence. Students studied, there needs to be something between studied and they. Does it help to know that you have so many choices for punctuating? Do you think this would empower your students as you enter your own classroom? Is this going to inspire you to write better legal briefs and decisions when you become a judge someday? Here's everything we've discussed when it comes to linking ideas and especially linking sentences. We have coordinating conjunctions, subordinating conjunctions, correlative conjunctions, conjunctive adverbs, and transitional phrases. Now, do you need to know the definition of any of these? Is it going to appear on a test? Or do you need to know how to use all of these words, phrases, and constructs effectively? As always, I wanted to give you some examples from literature. Today we are looking at the Victorian novel. The Victorian era spans from 1832 to 1901 in England, starts with the first Reform Bill, and then lasts to the death of Queen Victoria, for whom the age is named. What you see here is an excerpt from Emily Bronte's only published novel, Wuthering Heights. And our heroine, Catherine Earnshaw, is explaining to the family servant, Nellie, why she is so depressed that she has just agreed to marry her rich neighbor, Edgar. I've put the compound sentence punctuation choices in bold. And clearly what Bronte preferred were semicolons and colons. We have a semicolon and coordinating conjunction, a semicolon and a coordinating conjunction, a colon and a coordinating conjunction. How many sentences are there in this paragraph? Count them up. There are 3. Would this passage have the same impact without the compounding, without the conjunctions, if there'd just been colons and semicolons, not the and, so, and? Or could we argue that this really lets us into Kathy's head? How she's sort of frantic at this point. She's planning to marry Edgar Linton, but she's terribly in love with Heathcliff, who was adopted into her family and made into a virtual slave. This is an excerpt from Charles Dickens' novel Oliver Twist, including the famous passage where the boys in the orphanage, who are slowly starving, decide that someone is going to ask for more. If you know anything about Oliver Twist, you probably know the line, "Please, sir, I want some more." Look at Dickens' choices for how he punctuates his compound sentences. There are 3 sentences in this passage as well. We see a colon, a semicolon and coordinating conjunction, a semicolon, and a semicolon and coordinating conjunction. Is this just how the Victorians wrote? They liked their colons and semicolons rather than their commas? This might be something to explore. Is this a pattern in Victorian novels? You certainly have plenty to choose from. Today's practice is with the sensation novel Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Here are, again, 3 sentences. I've broken them out. I want you to figure out how you would punctuate this. Would you make a compound sentence out of 2 of these? How will you join them? A comma and conjunction, a semicolon, a colon? Pause the video and take at least 37 seconds to think about this. Think about how closely related the ideas are from sentence to sentence. Mary Elizabeth Braddon had all 3 of these sentences combined into one long compound one, and she used commas and coordinating conjunctions. It was a lonely place enough, even in all its rustic beauty, for so bright a creature as the late Miss Lucy Graham, but the generous baronet had transformed the interior of the grey old mansion into a little palace for his young wife, and Lady Audley seemed as happy as a child surrounded by new and costly toys. This is just what the author chose. What did you choose? Do you like your punctuation better? Would you have left all 3 sentences standing alone and not compounded them at all? What would change? What might be the impact on the reader? What if I had an and here and I put the but here? Does that shift the meaning? Does it shift our perception of these characters? Another one. Emily Bronte had 2 sisters who were also Victorian novelists, Anne Bronte and Charlotte Bronte, who's most famous today for her first novel from 1847, Jane Eyre. This comes deep into the novel when Jane Eyre, a poor plain governess, has discovered that her employer, Mr. Rochester, intended to marry her even though he already has a wife. Jane is a pious, good Christian girl, and she's horrified that she has come so close to a bigamous relationship. And here is what the character says about herself. How, where would you compound these sentences? Bronte chose semicolons and colons. No conjunctions, no conjunctive adverbs, no transitional phrases. Her life was pale, her prospects were desolate. A Christmas frost had come at midsummer, a white December storm had whirled over June, ice glazed the ripe apples, drifts crushed the blowing roses. On hayfield and cornfield lay a frozen shroud. Lanes which last night blushed with flowers today were pathless with untrodden snow. This is now 2 sentences. One rather straightforward at the beginning with a semicolon, and then this long, long description of how Jane Eyre feels about her life. She was happy, looking forward to the future. She was going to get married to a man whom she loves. And now she feels like everything is frozen. Is this a good choice? Would you have added some conjunctive adverbs? Some conjunctions? Would you have left these all as sort of bare, cold statements standing on their own? What would change? What wouldn't change? Bottom line, you have choices when you are punctuating compound sentences. But you want to keep in mind, as a student of rhetorical grammar, someone who has studied advanced grammar, What's the impact? How does your punctuation change sentence rhythm, emphasis, and meaning? This is a question you're going to need to keep in mind for today's quiz.